Let's start with a question that cuts deep. What really happens when someone who once craved your attention realizes it's gone? Not temporarily, not playfully, but truly, fully, unmistakably gone. This isn't about ghosting. This isn't about playing games. This is about something deeper, something stoic. What if I told you that your silence, your non-reaction, is more powerful than any final word, more unforgettable than any dramatic goodbye? See, we've been sold a common lie. That closure is loud, that value must be validated, that caring equals chasing. But what if the real strength lies in stillness, in no longer needing to prove your worth, in being at peace without permission? Let's challenge that popular belief. If they don't chase you when you leave, they never cared. Sounds convincing, but is it true? Or is it just another emotionally charged myth that keeps you stuck in a cycle of reaction and regret? The truth, if you're willing to face it, is much more interesting and far more powerful. Because what shakes them isn't your exit. It's the absence of your gaze. It's when you stop explaining, stop apologizing, stop giving. This video isn't here to teach you how to manipulate someone back into caring. It's here to awaken a new standard, where your attention is sacred, your energy is earned, and your silence becomes your greatest declaration. This is Stoicism, not as theory, but as emotional armor. And if you've ever felt like someone was taking your presence for granted, if you've ever wondered whether silence speaks louder than effort, stay with me. We're about to unravel the entire sequence, from the quiet panic to the loud denial, of how they truly react when your light no longer shines on them. By the time we're done, you won't just understand what they go through. You'll understand why your stillness is your strength, why stoic relationships aren't built on reactive love, but disciplined presence. You'll see how every non-response becomes a mirror, every ignored breadcrumb becomes a test, and every step you take away from chaos brings you closer to clarity. Because when you learn to protect your peace, to preserve your attention like gold, you don't just evolve, you become unreachable. And that, my friend, is where the transformation begins. So don't scroll, don't skip, because what's coming next? Oh, it's going to reveal more than you expect. And the ending, it won't just empower you, it'll reshape everything you thought you knew about connection, control, and stoic relationships. Ready to break the illusion? Let's go. 1. The shock of silence. When someone who once fed on your attention finally wakes up to its absence, the reaction isn't immediate panic. It's a strange, creeping confusion that settles into their chest like smoke under a closed door. At first, they don't notice the shift. Your silence doesn't scream, it hums, quiet, steady, unnerving. They post, they wait. They assume your gaze will follow, as it always did, an invisible tether keeping them at the center of your emotional orbit. But when the likes stop, the comments vanish, and the messages no longer arrive right on schedule, something begins to break, but it breaks slowly, and that's what makes it terrifying. It's not the drama of you leaving. It's the stillness after you've gone that begins to echo louder than words ever could. See, most people are conditioned to respond to noise, to anger, to confrontation, to closure wrapped in tears and punctuation. But when you offer none of that, when your departure isn't an explosion, but a gentle withdrawal, their ego doesn't know where to place the blame. That's when the questions begin. Not about you, but about them. Why aren't they looking back? Why didn't they react? Why do I feel like I'm fading? That is the shock of silence. It's not loud, it's not demanding, it's not even bitter, it's clear, it's disciplined. It's stoicism in its purest relational form. It says, I've made peace with my absence from your life without needing to declare it. And that, kind of clarity, that kind of self-control, that terrifies someone who relied on your emotional availability as their mirror, because here's what they never prepared for. you not reacting. Your calm isn't just unsettling, it's destabilizing. And the deeper truth, they were never afraid of you walking away. They were afraid of you walking away without checking to see if they noticed. Silence is a language, and when it's spoken from a place of strength, not spite, it becomes the loudest mirror they've ever stood in front of. They expect a chase, they expect a final message, they expect you to flinch. When you don't, they don't know how to define themselves in your absence. That's the collapse, that's the unraveling, and yet they won't show it. They'll smile louder, post brighter, perform happiness like a stage play they never auditioned for. But behind the scenes, the absence of your attention whispers the truth they've been avoiding. They didn't value you. They valued how they felt when you were watching. And when your eyes close, when your soul no longer lights up at their presence, they lose the emotional spotlight they mistook for self-worth. Imagine this. Someone who has always performed under the warmth of your energy. You were the audience, the light, the rhythm in their routine. Then one day, without warning or announcement, the curtain rises and the stage is empty. No claps, no cues, just silence. And in that silence, their identity begins to fracture. Because it was never about love. It was about control. Stoic relationships demand this kind of clarity, the kind that says, you had access and now you don't. And I owe you no explanation. That's not cruelty, that's growth. That's the ultimate reclaiming of self. And make no mistake, they feel it deeply. They just don't understand it yet. They tell themselves stories to soothe the bruised ego. You're just busy. You're being dramatic. You'll come around. But as the days stretch into weeks and your presence remains a void they can't fill, their confidence begins to decay. Slowly, quietly, shamefully. Because here's the Stoic truth. They never expected you to find peace without them. And yet here you are, not chasing, not questioning, not reacting, just building, just being, just existing without their name echoing in your world. Your silence is not punishment, it's elevation. It's you no longer making announcements about your worth. And the more you stay silent, the louder their self-doubt becomes. This is the power of stillness. It reveals what words would only dilute. And now they sit, scrolling, watching, wondering, but never reaching. Because pride is a mask. And silence is a mirror, and what they see staring back at them is not the version of themselves they built under your glow. It's the hollow shape of who they are without it. That is the first true reaction when they realize they've lost your attention. Not rage, not sorrow, not even guilt, just disorientation. A spiritual dizziness caused by the sudden blackout of your presence. You were their emotional North Star. And now they drift, quietly, aimlessly. And here's the beauty of it. You didn't push, you didn't plead, you didn't perform. You simply stopped giving energy to a space that never gave it back. That, my friend, is Stoicism in motion. Not indifference, but intentionality. Not apathy, but peace. And that peace, that's what shakes them. Because they never expected you to stop dancing to their silence. They never imagined a version of you who doesn't beg, doesn't explain, doesn't chase. And now that version stands still and unbothered while they stumble through the shadows of a spotlight they once thought would never dim. This is the moment they first feel the weight of your absence, and it doesn't just hurt, it humbles. Because you didn't leave to teach them a lesson. You simply outgrew needing to be seen to feel real. You became your own mirror, and in doing so, you became unreachable. And that, above all, is what they never prepared for. Stoic relationships don't crumble when one person walks away. They evolve when one person stops chasing. And now, your evolution has become the earthquake beneath their feet. They just haven't admitted it yet. But they will, in silence, in stillness. In every moment they reach for a version of you that no longer lives in their world. That's the power of your attention. And now that it's gone, their foundation isn't just shaken, it's gone. 2. The ego's performance begins. Once the silence begins to settle, and the initial shock gives way to an unnerving awareness, their ego begins its counterattack, not through vulnerability, not through honesty, but through performance. Because when someone who once thrived under the warmth of your attention realizes that spotlight has shifted, they don't step forward to speak their truth. Instead, they step into a character. The show begins quietly at first, a curated story here, a happy selfie there. Suddenly their feed lights up like Times Square, smiles, friends, captions about freedom, healing, and being unbothered. But what you're witnessing isn't peace. It's panic dressed in confidence. It's the ego scrambling to reclaim relevance in a world where your eyes are no longer watching. Because for them, attention was the currency, and now they're bankrupt, desperate to print counterfeit emotions to convince you, and more importantly themselves, that they're thriving without you. They won't say they miss you. That would be honest. They won't say your silence hit them harder than any breakup line ever could. That would be human. Instead, they build a performance so rehearsed, so meticulously edited, it almost convinces even them. But the cracks show, don't they? The timing feels too perfect, the captions too targeted, the joy a little too loud to be real. Why? Because they're not living, they're acting. And deep down you feel it, you see through it, because Stoicism teaches us to see not the show, but the silence between scenes, and the truth lies in what's not said. They start dropping breadcrumbs, not full conversations, just little signals meant to test the waters of your attention. A like on your post from 2 months ago, a random story view at 2:17 a.m., a subtle comment that could be innocent, and could be bait. Why do they do it? Because ego doesn't crave connection, it craves control. They don't want to rebuild, they want to know if they still have access. And this, right here, is where most people break. They see the post, they hear the laughter, and they start to doubt the silence. Maybe they really moved on. Maybe I'm the only one who cared. But pause. Ask yourself this. If they were so whole, so full, so healed, why are they still performing for someone who's no longer watching? Why does their joy need an audience? True peace is quiet. Real healing doesn't advertise. The Stoic way is not to react to noise, but to discern signal from spectacle. And what you're seeing now, it's theater, beautifully choreographed chaos aimed at resurrecting your curiosity. But you are not obligated to applaud a performance that was never meant for your healing. You are no longer their mirror. You are no longer their validation machine. You are not the quiet audience that makes their illusion feel real. Their ego, now starving for attention, performs not because they've moved on, but because you have. And that's the sting they can't mask, no matter how many filters they layer over their life. They expect you to see and flinch, but you don't. You scroll past. You pause, but not out of weakness, out of awareness. You see what they're doing, and more importantly, you see who you are now. You've built a version of yourself that doesn't need closure disguised as content. You've learned to let people perform their illusions without feeling the need to rewrite the script. That's power. That's discipline. That's stoicism in practice. It's choosing peace over performance, clarity over confusion. Because when someone shows you a curated life, you don't chase it. You bless it and keep walking, not with bitterness, but with boundaries. You stop being their fallback and start being your own foundation. And in that silence, your refusal to react becomes your greatest message. You no longer have emotional authority here. They might ramp up the posts. They might start getting louder, more deliberate, more pointed. But understand, it's not about you. It's about their loss of identity. When they were with you, they borrowed your light. Now that light is gone, and their ego is burning itself out trying to replicate it. But no post, no caption, no laugh is going to bring back the security they felt when they knew they mattered to you. And that's where the real unraveling begins. Because eventually, the performance exhausts itself. Eventually, the dopamine of attention wears off, and they're left alone with the truth they've been trying to bury under hashtags and highlight. Reels, you were real, the connection was real, but they mistook your consistent attention as permanent access. And now, without your presence, they're stuck on a stage with no audience, no applause, just echoes of what they once had. They might never admit this. Their pride might never let the words "I miss you" leave their mouth, but their actions scream it. The curated chaos, the social subtweets, the exaggerated happiness, they're all just different costumes in the same performance. And you? You no longer attend the show. You're out building, evolving, protecting the peace they didn't know how to appreciate. Because Stoic relationships don't thrive on emotional performances. They thrive on presence, on effort, on clarity. And anything less than that, well, it's just theater. So when they start acting louder, laughing harder, living freer, but only when they think you're watching, let that be your confirmation. Not of their peace, but of your growth. Because the more they try to reclaim your attention through noise, the more they reveal they're still bound to the illusion that they mattered more than your peace. But you've broken that spell, you've rewritten that story, you've stopped being their emotional audience and started being the main character in your own clarity. So let them perform, let them post, let them shout into the void. Your silence says everything they're not ready to hear. And if this part of the journey speaks to you, if you see the show and choose not to watch, I invite you now, like and comment #1 if you're reclaiming your peace. Subscribe if you're ready to never again fall for ego dressed as affection. This is your new beginning, and we're just getting started. 3. Breadcrumbs and Bait. There comes a moment after the performance fades and their ego's spotlight dims, that they start reaching not with clarity, but with strategy. Not to reconnect, but to test the boundaries of your emotional distance. This is the moment of breadcrumbs, small, calculated nudges designed to provoke curiosity without vulnerability, invitations without accountability. They won't call, they won't message a heartfelt apology, they won't say, "I miss you" or "I was wrong." That would require humility. Instead, they drop digital hints. A like on your old post, a reaction to your story, a comment on something unrelated but noticeable. And you know what it is. The moment it arrives, it's not communication, it's bait. It's an emotional probe dressed in casualness, meant to pull you back into the orbit they secretly resent you for leaving. But Stoicism teaches us not to respond to confusion. It teaches us to see not just the act, but the intention beneath it. And what you'll find in those breadcrumbs is not love, not even longing. It's control. A desire to see if they still matter, if they still have influence, if they can still make you flinch. You were once the giver of validation, the source of emotional stability, the mirror in which they admired the most curated version of themselves. Now, they're not offering connection. They're asking a question with no words. Do I still have access? And if you answer that question with even a glance, they win. Not because they've earned your presence, but because they've confirmed your attention is still pliable. This is not healing. This is ego maintenance, and it comes in many forms, some loud, some so quiet you almost miss them. They might send a message that looks accidental. They might mention you in a group story. They might show up somewhere you're known to frequent, smile just enough, then vanish like a ghost playing hide and seek. But all of it has one intention: to re-engage your emotional memory, to get you to respond, to care, to open the gate they once had free access to, but you don't live there anymore. Stoic relationships are built on mutual respect, not manipulation. They don't thrive on breadcrumb trails. They grow in the soil of consistency and truth. So when you receive one of these baited gestures, pause. Ask yourself, does this feel like a door being opened or a trap being set? Is this vulnerability, or is this ego pretending to be peace? Because people who genuinely want to rebuild come with clarity. They don't poke, they knock. They don't nudge, they speak. They don't test, they ask. But those who only miss the control, they'll never give you that honesty. They'll leave digital fingerprints all over your notifications and deny ever touching your peace. And this is where many falter, because breadcrumbs are soft, they're subtle, they feel harmless, a like here, a view there. But Stoicism asks us to rise above immediate gratification, to ask, does this interaction serve my growth, or just stir up the ghosts I've already buried? Because the truth is, they're not offering anything real. They're not asking to understand you. They're checking if you're still emotionally accessible. You are not a signal tower waiting to be activated. You are not a puzzle they can reassemble when they feel lonely. You are not an emotional gas station where they can top off when their ego runs dry. And even more, you are not the person who once needed their attention like oxygen. That version of you learned to breathe on their own. That version of you now recognizes that silence isn't empty. It's full of self-worth. That no reply is not neglect. It's protection. Protection from confusion disguised as communication. Protection from emotional games where the rules are always changing. Because this isn't about closure, it's about curiosity. Their curiosity, not yours. They're not throwing breadcrumbs to build a bridge. They're tossing pebbles into your lake to see if you still ripple. And the most powerful thing you can do is remain still, not to punish, not to dominate, but to prove to yourself that you are no longer bait, that you don't respond to ghost taps on glass, that you're no longer the person who mistakes activity for affection. Because here's the trap. Once you respond, the game resets. You reply to a story, they go silent. You acknowledge a post, they withdraw. It was never about reconnecting. It was about confirming that their absence still has weight in your world. And once they know that, their ego rests. They got what they needed. Proof that they still live rent-free in your emotional landscape. But you've outgrown that. You don't trade attention for illusion. You don't exchange peace for nostalgia. You don't chase shadows. And if a connection must be decoded, it's not a connection, it's a distraction. One meant to reroute your growth back to the places you already outgrew. So let the breadcrumbs fall, let the bait sink. Let them wonder why you don't react. Let them study your silence like it's a riddle they can't solve. Because your non-response is not a void, it's a statement. It says, I saw that. I understand what you're doing. And I choose clarity over comfort, truth over tension, peace over old patterns. And here's where the power doubles. Because when they don't get the reaction, when you don't flinch, when you don't come running like you once did, they get louder or quieter. But what they don't get is you, not anymore. Stoic relationships don't entertain what they've already outgrown. They move with intention, not impulse. They engage from strength, not scarcity. And if someone needs to lure you with tricks, they were never interested in building trust. You've come too far to be drawn in by breadcrumbs. You've built a table, and now only those who bring nourishment, not confusion, get a seat. That's your new standard, and that's what their ego never prepared for. So when the pokes come, the almost messages, the not-so-random comments, smile. Not because it flatters you, but because it confirms you've evolved. You no longer respond to half efforts. You no longer chase people who can't communicate, like adults. You no longer pause your progress to revisit someone else's emotional uncertainty. Let them throw breadcrumbs. Let them hope. Let them circle. Because you are not a bird waiting to be fed. You are the sky they can no longer reach. 4. Silent surveillance. Once the breadcrumbs fall flat and your stillness proves unshakable, they resort to a more haunting tactic, silent surveillance. It's not a confrontation, it's not a message, It's not even a performance anymore. It's lurking, quiet, obsessive, persistent. This is the phase where they don't engage, but they don't let go either. They don't want to reconnect, but they can't stop watching. Your name lives in their search bar. Your stories get viewed within minutes. Your posts are memorized, even if never acknowledged. This is the ghost phase, where they drift just close enough to see, but far enough to deny it's about you. And the irony? They once ignored you in real time. They took for granted every comment, every heart, every effort you gave. But now that your light no longer shines their way, they hide behind digital curtains and watch like a shadow afraid of the sun. Why? Because your silence isn't just the absence of attention. It's a mirror they can't avoid. A reflection of what they lost, not through your words, but through your peace. Because people expect noise when they hurt you. They expect an outburst, a farewell, a final plea. But when none of that comes, when your goodbye is wrapped in calm detachment, they don't know what to do with it. They begin to obsess, not because they love you, but because they no longer control the narrative. And now they stare at your growth like it's a puzzle they don't remember breaking. They check who's commenting. They analyze every face that appears next to you. They time your activity like a silent investigator. They don't message because that would expose them. They don't engage because that would require humility. But they're there, every day, every night, watching from the dark, convinced that by observing you, they can still play a part in your story. But they can't. They're no longer in the audience. They're watching from outside the theater, face pressed to the glass, hoping to interpret a show they're no longer invited to. And this surveillance is not curiosity, it's ego surveillance. It's an attempt to feel relevance by proximity. But Stoicism teaches us that observation without access is meaningless. Just because someone sees your life doesn't mean they're part of it. Just because they study your joy doesn't mean they contributed to it. You are not required to perform because someone is watching. And you don't owe awareness to someone who forfeited presence. Let them watch. Let them refresh your profile like a news feed. Let them sit with their questions, their regrets, their endless scroll through what they once had but didn't value. Because this is your life now. You don't grow in the shadow of surveillance. You bloom in the light of your own self-worth. And here's the most powerful part. Their eyes don't disturb you anymore. Their presence in your views doesn't shake your center, because you no longer live for digital acknowledgement. You live for inner clarity. You are no longer the performer who needs validation. You are the creator of a life so rooted in peace, their silent stares only highlight the distance and the truth they face while lurking. You didn't move on to spite them. You moved on to find yourself. You stopped performing. You stopped auditioning. You stopped waiting for someone to clap for your effort. That's why they keep watching, because they can't reconcile how someone they thought they had wrapped in uncertainty is now radiating. Peace without apology. That's the paradox of silent surveillance. They don't just want to see you, they want to understand how you're no longer needing to be seen. And that's the part that haunts them. So when they keep showing up in your views, when their energy lurks just behind the scenes of your digital world, let it remind you, presence doesn't mean connection. Watching doesn't mean caring. Observation doesn't mean love. It means one thing: they feel your silence more than they ever felt your words. And that silence, it's the most stoic response you'll ever give. No confrontation, no clarification, just calm continuation. Your life is no longer on pause. Your story is no longer their drama. Your evolution is not a performance, it's your private peace. And if they want to keep watching, let them. Let them scroll through memories they thought they'd never miss. Let them calculate who you've become while they were busy hiding behind pride. Let them see your glow and mistake it for distance, when it's really just self-respect. You don't need to respond. You don't need to react. You don't need to break your silence to confirm what they already know. You've outgrown the need to be noticed by those who overlooked you. And now, Now your life is the reflection of everything they weren't ready for: consistency, clarity, and emotional maturity. So let them linger, let them spy, let them play the silent witness to your freedom. Because what they're really haunted by isn't the idea of losing you, it's the reality that you didn't need them to be found. And if you feel this truth in your bones, if you've seen those silent eyes and chosen not to perform, then like this video and comment number 1 if you're claiming your silence as power. And don't forget to subscribe, because there's more truth coming, more insight, more growth, more stoic clarity. This is the season of elevation, and you're not walking it alone. 5. Comparison and internal crisis. After the watching grows stale and the silence fails to summon the response they anticipated, something more insidious begins to unravel within them. Not noise, not confrontation, but comparison. This phase doesn't play out in public. It happens in the hidden corridors of the mind, often at night, often alone, when the external performances have lost their shine and the echo of your silence remains too deafening to ignore. This is where their ego collides with reality. At first, it's subtle. A glance at your new post, a harmless scroll through your comments, a vague question that slithers into their thoughts. Who's giving you the attention they once monopolized? Who are you laughing with now? Are you glowing because of someone else, or simply because you're free of them? That's when the spiral begins. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind they broadcast to their friends. This one is quiet, private, and dangerous. Because they're not just comparing themselves to your new chapter. They're comparing themselves to the version of themselves that existed only in your presence. And the difference is startling. With you, they felt seen. Under your attention, they felt like someone. And now, in your absence, they feel unrecognizable. Because what they truly miss isn't you. It's the reflection of themselves they found in your eyes. They weren't in love with you. They were in love with who they became when you cared. And that realization, that breaks them more than the goodbye, because now someone else is experiencing that version of you, the one who shows up, who listens deeply, who encourages quietly, who makes even the broken feel like they matter. And they can't stand it. The Stoic path reminds us that what truly belongs to us cannot be lost, and what was never ours cannot be kept. But for them, this distinction doesn't bring peace. It brings envy. It brings the ache of realizing they had something rare and treated it like it would never leave. Now, as they scroll through your progress, they try to measure up to who you were, to who you are, to whoever now stands beside you. And here's the kicker. They might even be with someone else. They might post pictures, share stories, craft the illusion of having moved on. But behind all of that lies a festering truth. They're using someone else to try and fill a gap that only self-awareness can mend. And the more they pretend, the emptier they feel. Because you weren't just a person to them. You were a standard, a mirror, a calm they didn't know they needed until it was gone. And now, they compare. Every moment, every smile, every interaction becomes a mental checkpoint. Do they feel what they felt with you? Do they feel seen like you made them feel? And more often than not, the answer haunts them, because what they lost wasn't just attention, it was the identity they anchored in your presence. You became their reference point for value, and now that you've removed yourself from that role, they are left unmoored. And this is the moment where envy takes root. Not because you're flaunting anything, not because you're trying to make them jealous, but because your growth exposes their stagnation. Your peace shines a spotlight on their chaos, and they resent the mirror you no longer hold. This is why Stoic relationships are so powerful. They operate not from validation, but from values. They ground themselves not in ego, but in ethos. And once you leave that dynamic, your very existence becomes a disruption to anyone who only knew how to thrive with emotional shortcuts. You now live on a higher frequency, one that doesn't entertain breadcrumbs, doesn't flinch at surveillance, and certainly doesn't perform for ghosts. And in that clarity, you become untouchable. But make no mistake, they still compare. They still wonder. They still replay moments, trying to reverse engineer where they lost you. And some might even try to come back, not because they've changed, but because they hate not being able to compete. They hate watching someone else receive the energy they once misused. But that's not love, that's ego in disguise. That's possession masquerading as redemption. And you've grown too wise to fall for that. Because your silence wasn't just a withdrawal, it was a boundary. Your peace wasn't just a decision, it was a declaration. And now they sit in the distance, trying to match who you've become with a version of themselves that doesn't exist anymore. That's the pain they don't talk about, the quiet crisis of realizing that you were the best part of their story, not because you made them happy, but because you made them honest. You held up a mirror they can no longer find, and in your absence, that mirror shatters, so they compare, desperately, internally, continuously. But you keep rising, you keep building, you don't compete, you evolve. Because your worth no longer hinges on being chosen by those who didn't know how to keep you. You're not waiting to be reevaluated. You've already recalibrated. You've already walked away from needing to be better than their next chapter. Because you're not a chapter. They were merely a paragraph in your becoming, and the more they compare, the clearer your growth becomes, not because you flaunt it, but because it's undeniable. You walk differently now. You speak from wholeness, not from hunger. You no longer crave closure, you create it. And that, above all, is what they never expected. That the version of you they see now is someone they no longer recognize, someone they no longer deserve access to, someone who stopped waiting for recognition and started building without applause. So let them compare, let them reflect, let them drown in the silence they once thought meant nothing. Because your peace isn't a performance, it's your proof. 6. Anger and denial surface. Eventually, when all else fails, when the silence remains unbroken, the breadcrumbs ignored, the performances unseen, and the comparisons unbearable, they erupt, not with honesty but with confusion, not with clarity but with noise. And that noise manifests as anger, not the righteous kind that seeks justice, but the spiteful, directionless, emotionally displaced kind that doesn't even understand why it exists. They begin to twist your stillness into selfishness, your absence into betrayal, your peace into punishment. But make no mistake, their fury isn't about anything you've done. It's about what you've stopped doing. You stopped explaining. You stopped overgiving. You stopped offering emotional CPR to someone who saw your care as currency they didn't have to earn. And that sudden severance of attention, that disruption of the supply, that's what lights the fire. They won't come to you with humility. They won't ask questions like, "Did I hurt you?" or "Can we talk?" Instead, they'll get passive-aggressive, cold, dismissive. Their words become sharp, their tone inconsistent, their attitude shifting like a storm without warning. One moment they'll pretend you never mattered. The next, they'll lash out like a child robbed of their favorite toy. And yet, not once will they acknowledge the root of their reaction, loss of control. Because to admit that your absence destabilized them would require a level of self-awareness their pride simply can't afford. So instead they turn you into the villain in their version of the story. You became distant, you changed, you became cold. But the truth, you just became unavailable to inconsistency. You finally enforced the boundary they never believed you'd keep. And that's what stings, not the silence but the conviction behind it, not the distance but the discipline it reveals. You see, Stoicism doesn't ask you to be emotionless. It asks you to master your emotions so well that someone else's chaos doesn't dictate your character. And you've done that. You've refused to let their narrative lure you back into a dialogue that never respected your truth. You've learned that not every jab deserves a defense, that not every triggered ego needs an answer. Because anger, in this context, is not a call for understanding. It's a protest against power lost. It's the final tantrum of a wounded ego that realizes it no longer dictates the emotional terms. But here's the part they never see coming. Your refusal to argue back isn't weakness, it's wisdom. You don't need to clear your name. You don't need to justify your healing. You don't need to react to projections. Your peace is not up for debate. Your silence is not a void. It's a verdict. And while they rage against a version of you they no longer understand, you keep building, you keep breathing, you keep evolving beyond the reach of their reactions. That's what truly unsettles them. Not just that you've moved on, but that you've moved on without needing to be seen doing so. And still, they'll deny. They'll scream their indifference louder than ever, but remember, the loudest one in the room is often the most afraid of silence. Because silence demands introspection. It forces the mirror to be turned inward, and not everyone can handle what they see there. So they lash out. They create conflict where there was only closure. They fabricate disrespect to avoid accountability. But you no longer engage. Not because you're bitter, but because you're better. You've realized that anger is not always an invitation. Sometimes it's just noise, desperate, hollow, temporary noise trying to fill the void where your energy used to live. And when that noise doesn't work, when it fails to provoke the old version of you, the one who would have argued, defended, over-explained, they face the most painful truth of all: you've changed. You've outgrown the emotional economy, where their validation was your paycheck. You've upgraded from needing to be understood to being grounded in your own understanding. And that, more than anything, is what fuels their fury. Because your silence exposed the gap between who they pretend to be and who they really are. And no amount of shouting can close that chasm. So they spiral, they stew, they shift the story. But deep down, they know. They feel it in the quiet hours, in the way they keep checking your feed, in the way their thoughts keep circling your name like a planet without gravity. Because they lost something they didn't know how to value: your steady, stoic presence. And now all they can do is rage at the space you used to fill. But you don't flinch, you don't return fire. You don't lower yourself to rejoin a war you never wanted. You simply walk on. Not out of spite, but out of purpose, because stoic relationships don't chase chaos, they cultivate calm. And in your calm, you've become unreachable, not because you've gone cold, but because you've finally learned the temperature of self-respect. So let them be angry, let them throw their tantrums in the dark, let them label your evolution however they need to soothe their pride. You don't owe them a response, you owe yourself your peace. And if this part of your journey resonates, if you felt the sting of someone reacting not to your actions, but to your absence, then like this video and comment number 1 to affirm your growth. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because this path we're on, it's not just about healing, it's about honoring the stoic discipline it takes to stay whole in a world that profits from your fragmentation. You're not bait, you're not a backup plan. You are the calm after their chaos, and you are just getting started. So here you are, at the end of a storm that was never about rage, but about reclaiming, not about revenge, but recalibration. You've walked through the silence, the panic, the performances, the bait, the watching, the comparisons, the anger, and through it all, you didn't flinch, you didn't fold, you didn't chase. What began as loss became liberation. What once felt like rejection revealed itself as redirection. Because the truth is, when you finally stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, you start to understand yourself in ways you never imagined. You see, silence isn't about punishment. It's about preservation. It's the sacred space between stimulus and response where your clarity sharpens and your peace deepens. In Stoic relationships, this silence becomes the ground upon which self-respect is rebuilt. Not because you had to walk away, but because staying would have cost you your center. And if you look back now, not with longing, but with perspective, you'll see how every ignored message, every unreturned gaze, every moment you resisted the urge to chase was a brick laid in the foundation of your future. You began this journey, wondering if they'd notice your absence. Now you stand knowing that your presence was never the problem. It was your generosity, your consistency, your hope. Those were never flaws. They were gifts, just given to the wrong recipient. And now, you don't give like that anymore. You give slower, you give wiser, you give where you're met, not where you're drained. And in that choice lies your power. No longer do you hand out front row seats to people who only clap when the spotlight hits them. You've raised the price of admission to your energy, and rightly so, because when you finally realize your peace is more valuable than their validation, you stop trading calm for chaos. You stop explaining your worth. You stop reacting to ghosts. You become still, not out of apathy, but out of alignment. And stillness, my friend, is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's the knowing that not everyone who watches is worthy of being welcomed, that not every poke deserves presence, that not every echo of the past needs a reply. Some people were only meant to be mirrors, temporary reflections of who you once were. And now that you've grown, that mirror no longer fits. You no longer see yourself in them. You no longer recognize the person who once danced for their breadcrumbs. You've shifted from asking, "Why did they stop loving me?" to realizing, "I've stopped needing their love to feel whole." That's what Stoicism teaches us, not to suppress but to elevate, not to numb but to discern, not to close off but to open up only to what aligns with our values, our peace, our path. And now, every time you feel that old tug, that temptation, to peek, to reply, to reach, remember what it cost you. Remember the nights you overthought, the messages you rewrote, the emotions you exhausted trying to decode silence from someone who never intended to offer clarity. Remember how you used to shrink yourself to fit into their attention span. And now remember this, you never have to do that again. Because what comes next isn't about them, it's about you. About who you become when you no longer perform for attention but embody intention. About what you build when your energy is no longer scattered but sacred. About how you show up for yourself when no one else is watching. That is the heart of Stoic relationships. Not the absence of feeling, but the refusal to be ruled by it. You've learned to sit with your discomfort, to watch the waves of doubt rise and fall without drowning in them, to observe the game without rejoining the players, and in doing so, you've discovered the kind of power that doesn't shout. It stands, the kind of love that doesn't chase, it invites, the kind of presence that doesn't demand, it anchors. And if there's one final truth to hold as you step forward, it's this. You didn't lose them. You released them. You released the illusion, the fantasy, the version of the relationship that existed only in your giving. And in that release, you gained something far greater, yourself. So walk with that, stand with that, speak from that, and let your life, calm, clear, grounded, be the message they were never prepared to read. You are no longer someone they get to remember. You are someone they'll never forget. Because your silence wasn't absence, it was arrival into the life, the love, the peace that was waiting for you all along. And now that you've found it, you never have to go back, not even to explain why. Stay rooted, stay elevated, stay you.